Hi friends, this is Caitlin. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be making a really beautiful layered spring card by layering two different stamp sets. So today I'm using the Sending Hugs stamp set as well as Happy Easter with this sweet little bear. And then for the background we're going to be doing two separate layers of this Radiant Burst stencil with some Distress Oxide inks. And I just love how this card turned out. So to start out everything, I'm going in with my Sending Hugs stamp set, and we're going to be stamping that envelope with the florals, and I'm putting it a little more to the left of my paper so that way I have room to add the bear so that it's kind of leaning out of the side. You could definitely do this straight up as well. I just thought it would be fun to change it up a little bit and add a little bit of a weird angle or unique angle to it. So then I'm stamping my image again onto a full stick post-it note, and I am just going to fussy cut the edges that I need to so that my bear kind of lines up really easily with that flower and envelope border. So I didn't worry about the left-hand side at all because my bear is not going over there. So you just need to fussy cut out whatever section you are layering your bear on top of. And then I got my bear all lined up where I was happy with it and stamped that down as well. For this kind of stamp where there is a lot of room between the actual stamped lines over its belly, I do like to peel up that section and replace it down to make sure that there's no air bubbles in there that might pick up the ink just in case. So then I also added on that little necklace. I just thought it was so cute and made the bear look a little more prim and proper. So once the necklace was in, I decided to start my Copic coloring. I'm going in with some Y30 markers for these to kind of make them look a little bit like daisies. These kinds of stamp sets are really fun because you can get really technical with them, or you can just let your imagination run wild and color these flowers in whatever way makes you happy. So I went with these Y30s because they definitely have a softer, more buttery kind of look to them. And then for these, I went almost with a poppy kind of feel. I went in with my R20, so I'm using 27, 24, I believe, and 22. Just kind of layering in my darkest color first, adding any shadows to those artist drawn lines and anywhere where one petal would be laying on top of another petal, creating that shadow, and then working in my medium and then lightest shade for that highlight. These flowers are drawn so beautifully and they kind of really easily tell you where your shadows need to go. And I really love that about this stamp set. You don't have to overthink to make it look beautiful. You can just shade them kind of in whatever way feels natural to you, and they're definitely going to be beautiful. So I decided to jump over to my to my foliage and to see how that was going to make everything look before I decided on my final colors for the center of my little yellow flowers. And so I started out with these bigger green leaves, and I'm just going in with two green shades, kind of emphasizing that vein that runs down the middle, and then going in with my lighter green to blend that out. And at this point I wasn't sure what color I was going to do for the smaller kind of sprigs that are sticking out of this floral bouquet, but I ended up deciding to make them like lavender. So where the whole thing is a purple color instead of doing green, but you could definitely color these all in green and just use a different green combination. I've done that in the past and it still turned out super beautiful, but I really wanted to bring in a little more color. And so I thought going in with some BV markers would really help to tie in a third color and really help this to pop and feel way more of a spring bouquet. I cannot wait to use this stamp set again towards the fall and make this a really beautiful, like a burnt orange and burgundy floral scheme. This is going to be absolutely stunning for fall too. So definitely something fun to keep in mind, that a stamp set like this is something you could use all year round just by changing up your color story. So I did go in and just add in a little bit of shading where those little kind of floral clusters meet on each of those stems. Then went in with one shade lighter just to blend all that out. And I wanted to keep the center part of those yellow flowers a little softer and more neutral, so I just went in with some tan colors and added a few little dots in a darker brown for a little extra touch of texture. And then for my envelope, I wanted to give some shadow under my flowers without making the envelope look like it was a color. I still wanted it to read as a white envelope. So I'm going in with some cool gray markers and just kind of adding in some shadows under the flowers as well as along the edges and where that bottom flap is folded up. And then I use the same shades to color in the necklace, just giving it a little bit of dimension. And just for an extra pop, I added a teeny tiny C shape to each of those with that C5. For my bear, I decided to keep her super soft and neutral as well. I figured if I made her too dark, she would start to pull everything a little more into that fall vibe, and I just was not feeling that. So I went in with my softer E30 markers, and I mostly just shaded in those areas back behind the flowers with the darkest shade, just because there's so little space there. It didn't feel like it needed multiple colors. Then I started going in with that E31 to blend out my darker shade. And this is when it's fun to kind of play with your markers, because that E34 is not a dark marker, but by using it with two shades that were so much lighter, it really does still pop and give me that definition and contrast that I was looking for. I did go in with a few layers of that E30 to make sure that my blend was really soft and smooth. I brought in one super light E marker just to blend out the space on the muzzle to make sure that it was still lighter and contrasted against the rest of the face. And then I colored in her nose just a dark brown. I went in to fussy cut this, and it felt like too much to do a complete right up against the black line fussy cut, so I did leave a little bit of a white border. But I also had a feeling that I was going to use a craft cardstock for my backdrop panel, and so I figured a little white border to help make everything really pop and feel cohesive would not hurt. So I added a tiny little highlight to each eye and a little highlight on the nose, and that is our combined stamp image ready to go. So I decided to use a white card base with a little matte panel of that craft cardstock. So I trimmed that down just so that there would be a tiny little white border all the way around. And I used my image to frame up my stencil placement. I wanted the circular part there, the center of the burst, to go right behind my bear's head. So holding that in place and just adding the tape underneath made that super easy. I went in with this first layer on my Radiant Burst stencil with saltwater taffy oxide ink, just a really soft kind of corally color. And then my favorite thing to do with this style of stencil, and I think it works beautifully with this stencil in particular, is to peel up that layer, which you get that satisfying presentation of it, and then wipe off the extra ink that I have there. I'm not worrying about washing it yet because I don't want it to be wet. So I reline up my image, and then I just tilt it just enough that you can't see those lines anymore. And that way when you go in with your second color, they're perfectly lined up, and it creates this beautiful, that burst effect, but almost like a firework or something, because the layers stacked and staggered next to each other, it just creates a whole nother layer of dimension to this kind of stencil. So I went in with that one with Abandoned Coral for a little more pop, and to match those poppy shades, the poppy flowers that I colored in there. So beautiful. Now, because I used oxide inks for my stamping, I did want to use another oxide ink for my sentiment. Sometimes I find that my black ink, my like premium dye inks, do not layer well over top of those oxides, but oxides layer really well over each other to cover each other up. So I did end up going in with Black Soot Distress Oxide just to make sure that my sentiment was nice and dark and visible. Then I glued that panel right down onto my white card base. I just used liquid glue so that I still had some time to shift it around and make sure that everything was nice and straight. You can see I'm pressing instead of like rubbing my panel because I was not positive that my oxide inks were dry yet. So something else to keep in mind if you're not going to let them dry is to make sure you're pressing and not swiping. I popped my little bear up with some foam tape because If you know me, you know that I am obsessed with the Pawsome Stamps sequin mixes. And so this is me rifling through some of my stash to try to figure out what color combination was going to look the most beautiful. And I did settle on the Spring Bling, which is one of the newer sets that are out. I just love these really soft pastels, and I thought they tied in so beautifully with the colors that I used for my florals. So I'm gonna do a couple around, a couple tucked under my image, one on top of my envelope and one up there at the top. Once I was happy with my placement, I just went in with my liquid glue and dotted that on and popped all of my little sequins into place. And that brings the whole card together. So I hope you're feeling super inspired to play with your different stamp sets and see how you might be able to layer them to create a new image that's custom to you. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. If you made it this far, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I hope that you have the most amazing week, and as always, happy crafting.